Morning sunlight filtered through the birch trees, casting soft golden specks across the stone path that wound its way to a quiet cottage nestled beside Lake Silverwood. The air was cool and damp with early dew, and a faint breeze carried the scent of pine needles and something sweeter, like fresh bread toasting on a cast-iron stove. Inside, 12-year-old Clara Whitmore once curled herself beside the hearth, a worn novel in hand and her mother humming softly in the kitchen. Her father's voice would rise from the study now and then, reading aloud a line of poetry, asking what she thought it meant. That cottage wasn't just a house. It was a world wrapped in soft blankets and firelight. A place where love lived in the quiet things, unspoken but deeply known. Her father, a quiet man with ink-stained fingers and a soft laugh, taught literature at the local college. Her mother painted for no one but herself. Wild landscapes, dreamlike skies, portraits full of emotion. They filled Clara's world with color and language, raised her not just to be good, but to feel deeply, to listen to the spaces between words. But even the gentlest places are not spared by fate. It happened one night in December, a spark in the fireplace, a wind too strong. The fire spread fast, greedy and wild. Clara was the only one pulled from the wreckage, her body trembling, her hands blistered, her wide eyes too stunned for tears. Somewhere through the smoke, her mother had called her name one last time, and then, silence. That night, everything she understood as home turned to ash. After the fire, the world became quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that settled into your bones, the kind that made even the sound of your own breath feel too loud. With no close family to claim her, Clara was sent to live with her father's brother, Philip Whitmore, and his wife, Margaret, in the northern hills of Vermont. Their house was grand, 3 stories tall, with tall windows and marble floors that echoed with every step. But it wasn't a home. It was a place of cold surfaces and colder gazes. From the moment she arrived, Clara knew she wasn't welcome. Philip hardly looked at her. Margot smiled too tightly, as if holding back irritation every time Clara entered the room. They spoke of duty, not family, obligation, not love. Her room was in the attic, a narrow space with slanted ceilings and a single window that caught the sun for only a few hours each day. But it became her sanctuary. There, surrounded by shadows and dust, Clara wrote. She filled notebooks with stories no one would read, letters no one would answer, poems about homes that still stood. No one asked her how she was. No one asked what she dreamed of. At school, she kept to herself. She was the quiet girl with distant eyes and ink-stained fingers, always scribbling in the margins of her notebooks. Teachers admired her essays. Classmates ignored her. And when she came home, the silence of the Whitmore estate swallowed her whole once more. Years passed like this. Like wind over stone, slowly wearing her down, but Clara didn't break. She bent, quietly. She learned to expect nothing, to speak only when spoken to survive by becoming invisible. But inside her, something endured. Not hope, not yet, but the faint, flickering ember of a voice that refused to be extinguished. Clara was 17 when she heard her name spoken like a problem being solved. It was late autumn. Winds scraped against the window panes, and the trees outside stood like blackened skeletons. She was passing by the study when she heard voices behind the closed oak door. Her uncle's tone was sharp, hushed, but not gentle. "She's almost of age, we've done our part. Julian Rowe has agreed. If the marriage goes through, our debts disappear." The name struck her like a stone. Julian Rowe. A man she knew only through headlines and dust jackets, a reclusive novelist turned rare book collector, widowed, wealthy, 48, known for his brilliance and his distance. People respected him, feared him. No one claimed to truly know him. Clara's heart pounded. She stepped away, hoping it was a misunderstanding, but deep down she knew better. That evening she was summoned to the dining room. No soft candlelight, no warmth. Just the yellow glare of a single bulb, and Philip and Margot seated at opposite ends of the long table like cold judges. Philip didn't waste words. "You'll be marrying Mr. Rowe in 3 weeks." Clara stared, her breath catching. I don't even know him." "You don't need to," Margaret replied, voice clipped, her smile brittle. "He'll provide for you. Comfort, stability. You'll be safe." "You owe us, Clara," Philip added. Every meal, every book, every roof over your head, we paid for it. This is how you repay us." The walls felt closer now. Her throat tightened. She looked at their faces and saw no kindness, only calculation. 3 weeks later, she stood at the altar of a stone cathedral, her wedding dress clinging to her like it had a will of its own. Her lips were painted the palest pink, her eyes were hollow. She moved down the aisle slowly, each step heavier than the last. Guests she'd never met turned to look, not at her, but at Julian. He stood in silence, tall in a tailored black suit, his gray eyes unreadable. No smile, no welcome. When the priest asked, "Clara Whitmore, do you take?" she barely whispered, "I do." Julian slid the ring onto her finger. His hand was warm, steady. He leaned in, kissed her cheek, nothing more. There was applause, but inside her, only silence and fear. The car ride after the wedding felt like drifting through a dream Clara hadn't asked to enter. The sky outside the window was pale and heavy, mirroring the stillness inside the vehicle. Beside her, Julian Rowe sat in silence, composed, unreadable, his hands folded neatly in his lap like this, too, was part of some long-written script. Not once did he look at her. Not once did he try to touch her. And somehow that unsettled Clara more than if he had. She had braced herself for control, for cold commands, for being consumed the way people are in stories when they're sold instead of chosen. But what greeted her was something far more difficult to understand. Distance wrapped in politeness, silence with a strange softness beneath it. The estate revealed itself just as the sun began to dip, stone and wood tucked beside a quiet lake, framed by weeping trees and wild ivy. It looked old, weathered, not unloved, but paused, like someone had once lived there with great care and then stopped. Julian didn't offer her a tour. He didn't speak about the house or the people in it. Instead, he led her down a quiet hallway, stopping before a white door at the very end. "This is yours," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "You can rest here, take as much time as you need." Then he left her, just like that. No wedding night, no questions, no expectations. Clara sat on the edge of the bed for hours that evening, still in her wedding dress, waiting for the sound of a knock that never came. But the next morning, something strange happened. Outside her door was a silver tray, ginger tea, still warm, and a single butter cookie, golden at the edges. The same kind she once mentioned liking in passing to a housekeeper, weeks ago. She picked it up slowly, as if it might vanish. Later that day, she opened her desk drawer to find a leather-bound notebook, pristine. On the first page, in neat, deliberate script, "Write it down if you find it hard to speak." Clara stared at the words, her breath catching. This wasn't kindness as she understood it. It was quieter, unspoken, almost invisible. And yet, for the first time since the cathedral, she didn't feel afraid. She felt confused, uncertain, and that, somehow, was even more terrifying. The notebook stayed closed. Clara saw it every day, resting in the drawer like it had always belonged there. She hadn't opened it again since reading the single, quiet message, but its presence lingered, like a sentence left unfinished, like an invitation left unanswered. She didn't know what unsettled her more, the silence of this house or the gentle precision of Julian's small, wordless gestures. He hadn't spoken to her since that first night, but every morning the tea tray appeared, and somehow it was always just right. He was kind but not soft, distant but never cruel, and Clara didn't know what to do with that. Then came the dream. It gripped her like a storm. In it, the walls burned again, the smoke curled around her like a shroud. Her mother's voice, desperate, screaming her name, ripped through her chest like glass. She woke choking on air, drenched in sweat, fingers clawing at the sheets. Her lungs refused to steady, her skin felt too tight. And she was alone. Until she wasn't. The door opened with a quiet creak. She froze, heart hammering. Julian stepped into the moonlight, barefoot, in a loose shirt with the sleeves unbuttoned. He didn't speak, he simply looked at her. Really looked at her. Then crossed the room and sat gently on the edge of her bed. Still no questions, no assumptions. just presence. Was it the fire, he asked finally, voice so low it almost disappeared between them? Clara nodded slowly. She didn't try to hide the tears on her cheeks. Julian stared at the window. Then, after a pause, he said, "Pain has a way of waiting for quiet to return." It wasn't comfort, not exactly. It was understanding. Raw, unfiltered, shared. She turned toward him, this man she had feared, misunderstood, and, for the first time, didn't feel smaller in his shadow. When he stood to leave, he looked back at her once more. "You don't owe me silence," he said softly. Then he left. And in the stillness that followed, Clara felt something loosen in her chest, like a door had opened somewhere inside her, quietly, without force. And for the first time, she didn't want to close it again. Clara didn't sleep the rest of the night. After Julian left, she lay awake in the quiet, not with fear this time, but with something harder to name. The darkness no longer pressed in from the corners. It lingered, yes, but not as a threat. It felt still, thoughtful. His words echoed softly through the hours. "You don't owe me silence." No one had ever said that to her before. Not at the Whitmores. Not at school. Not even in the house she'd lost. It stayed with her, not like a command, but like a light left on in another room. By the time morning came, Clara was still awake. She watched the pale sunlight reach gently across the wooden floor, tracing quiet shapes across the rug, the desk, the edge of her bed. And for some reason, she stood up. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't obligation. It was something quieter than both. Curiosity, maybe, or the need to see if the silence between them had truly changed, or if she'd only imagined it. She walked the hallway with slow steps, still barefoot, wrapped in the same cardigan she'd clutched through the night. And that's how she found him. In the library. The room was flooded with morning light, soft and golden, like a moment that had been waiting to happen. Books lined every wall, and in the center, at a large oak desk, Julian sat writing. Head bent, focused, unaware. Until he looked up. And when he did, it wasn't with surprise or stiffness. It was with something calm, something open. "Clara," he said, her name settling into the space between them like it belonged there. She hesitated in the doorway, then took a step in. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For not asking me to pretend." Julian nodded once, gently. "You never have to thank me for that," he said. And in that moment, she realized something had shifted. He wasn't waiting for her to become someone else. He was waiting for her, as she was. The days that followed moved gently. Clara began to spend more time outside her room. At first, it was only to fetch her tea tray or pass by the library door. But then, slowly, she lingered, longer by the windows, longer near wherever Julian happened to be. Sometimes he would look up and nod. Other times she would pretend to be looking at a book, just to stay in the same room a few moments more. She didn't know when it happened, but the house no longer felt like a place she'd been sent to. It was beginning to feel like something she chose. One evening, a week after that night, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the garden just past twilight. The sky was washed in indigo and the lake shimmered like silver glass beneath the moon. She didn't hear his footsteps until he was beside her. Julian stood quietly, hands in his coat pockets. They didn't speak for a long while. The silence wasn't heavy, it simply was. Then he said without turning to her, "I don't want you beside me because you feel you have to be." Clara looked at him, startled, not by his words, but by the ache in them. "I don't want to be someone you endure, Clara," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to stay only if your heart asks you to." No one had ever asked her what her heart wanted. For a long time she said nothing. Her thoughts moved slowly, quietly, like ripples across water. Then she stepped closer, just enough for her shoulder to brush his sleeve. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, "but I know what it's not." He turned to her, waiting. "It's not fear anymore," she whispered. "It's not obligation." Julian's breath caught. She looked up at him fully now, voice steady. "I'm still finding the words, but I'm not running from them anymore. And in the dim glow of moonlight, Clara finally saw what had always been there in his gaze. Not ownership, not expectation, just hope, quiet and patient, waiting to be chosen. They didn't speak of that night again. Not the garden, not her words, not the way she had stepped closer and allowed the silence between them to become something warmer. But something had shifted. Julian no longer avoided her gaze, and Clara no longer avoided her feelings. They shared mornings now, tea and books, conversations that began with soft pauses and ended with unspoken understanding. Still, Julian kept his distance in one quiet way. He never asked her to define what they were. Until one afternoon, Clara entered his study to find him at his desk, a single black envelope placed neatly in the center. Her name was written across the front in his familiar, steady hand. She picked it up slowly, her pulse tapping at her skin. Inside, legal papers, ownership transfer, Rowe and Whitmore rare books. Her name stood at the top, sole owner. She turned toward him, confusion tightening in her chest. Julian stood near the window, not looking at her, his hands in his pockets. "I meant what I said," he said quietly. "I don't want to keep you here because of gratitude, or habit, or comfort." He looked at her then, eyes steady. "This is yours, all of it. You can walk away tomorrow and nothing will be taken from you." Clara stared at him. This man who once terrified her, who now, without needing to say it, was offering her the one thing she had been denied all her life. Choice. She stepped forward, voice shaking. "I'm not staying because I have nowhere to go," she whispered. "I'm staying because this..." Her hand brushed over her heart. "This is the first place I've wanted to come back to." And as he pulled her into his arms, nothing more needed to be said. Because she had chosen. 3 years later, the house by the lake no longer echoed with silence. Laughter now drifted through its halls, small, high-pitched and contagious. 2 tiny voices calling for Mama and Papa. Feet pattering across the wooden floors. Lily and Iris had arrived one spring morning, their first cries breaking open a kind of joy neither Clara nor Julian had known they were capable of. The bookshelves remained, taller than ever. So did the tea in the mornings. So did the garden, wild and golden, now filled with small shoes and soft blankets spread across the grass. But most of all, what remained was clarity, a life built not on obligation, but on the quiet daily choice to stay. Clara no longer woke from fire-soaked dreams. Julian no longer waited for someone to leave. They had both been haunted once, by what was taken, by what had broken. But now they were healed by the simplest things. Shared breakfasts by the window. Nights spent soothing crying babies in each other's arms. Autumn leaves raked in silence, hand in hand. And sometimes, when the world was still and the lake reflected only moonlight, Clara would lean into Julian's shoulder and whisper, "Thank you for letting me choose." To which he would always reply, "Thank you for choosing." Again and again. Because sometimes the strongest homes aren't made of stone or wood. They're made of hearts that stay, of love that doesn't demand, and of a quiet, steadfast answer to the question no one dared ask. Will you stay, even when you're free?